You're listening to the Cash Podcast, creating affluence, success, and happiness with your financial surgeon, Adam Koós, President and Portfolio Manager at Libertas Wealth Management Group at libertaswealth.com.
All right. Hello, everybody. Today, we're going to be learning from Natalie Siston, 20-year veteran leadership consultant, about how to help your company survive and thrive thinking small and developing a culture where everyone's work matters. But before we get started, a little housekeeping. If this is your first time listening or watching, thanks so much for joining us. The Cash Podcast is produced weekly, and as stated in the intro, Cash stands for creating affluence, success, and happiness, and that's our mission. My hope is for you to learn a little bit more on each and every episode so that you become more successful, wealthier, and happier, and more educated than you were when you started watching or listening today. Speaking of, we're both on iTunes and YouTube, so feel free to subscribe. And if we ever have any links, charts, or other educational items, please feel free to head over to libertaswealth.com and check those out. All right, before we get into any questions here, I want to formally introduce Natalie. Her career has taken her from Silicon Valley to the Fortune 100 and then into entrepreneurship. So she says that being raised in a small town called Republic, Ohio, population 600, that's 600, that this is where she learned her greatest leadership lessons. And she uses these lessons learned from small town living to help leaders and organizations create big success in the world. And in addition to being a 10-year 4-H member and repeat state fair champion in public speaking, Natalie is also a 2-time graduate of The Ohio State University and professional coach, accredited through the International Coach Federation. She has more than 20 years of experience coaching, developing leaders, and strengthening teams in nonprofit, higher education, and corporate sectors, working both one-on-one and in small group coach settings to help her clients become more connected, not only to themselves, but to their work, families, and communities. She's a frequent speaker at Leadership University and corporate events, and currently lives in Dublin, Ohio, with her husband, Rob, and 2 young daughters. So thank you so much for coming on the podcast today, Natalie.
Oh, I'm excited to be here, Adam. This will be a fun conversation. I already can feel it.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to it. It's we've known each other for a pretty long time here. So, and I've been kind of following your story as it's kind of progressed from the Fortune 100 on to where you are now today. So I'm really excited to hear more details, selfishly, just so I understand more. So let's just start here. I mean, not all of us can say that we grew up in a town where we literally almost knew every single person who lived there. So if you don't mind, describe for me what it was like going from a town of 600 people to the largest university in the country, and then to a cross-country move.
Well, I can't think of a better place for me to learn how to live in a big world than in a small town. Republic, Ohio. I'm going to do a geography lesson. For those who are listening who are in Ohio, this might help you understand where it is, because if you're like most people, you have no idea where Republic is. So basically draw a line straight up from Columbus, Ohio, and slightly to the west. So it's northwest, north central Ohio. It's about an hour from Sandusky, an hour from Toledo, about 90 minutes from where I'm sitting right now in Dublin, Ohio. So it's, if you were to chunk the state into quarters, it's like right in the middle of northwest Ohio. So it's, for many people know it on their way to up to Lake Erie, they pass through Republic. There are no stoplights. So depending on the direction you're going, you just keep on driving through. But growing up in a town like that, where to your point, you get to know everybody and you get to know everybody's business. And so I learned early in life that you could either resent that, like, oh my gosh, they totally know I screwed up or I messed up or I made a mistake, or you can embrace the fact that people are going to be there for you when you need them. And I took that latter path, and that, I believe, is what helped me be successful at Ohio State and then at Stanford University, where I had my first job out of college. And then as I moved back home and took my Fortune 100 job, because in a small town, getting to know people is so crucial. And I think all the clients you work with, all the people listening, wherever you work, knowing that your work matters, knowing that you as a human matter, knowing that you have a connection to other people, that's what keeps you coming back. That's what makes you show up to do a good job. And I took that for granted, Adam. Like, I truly didn't even think about that until I set foot at Ohio State. And prior to going to Ohio State, I had a summer job at the local bank in Attica, Ohio, which is a little bigger than Republic. And the vice president of the bank called me into his office before I went to Ohio State. He was also an alum. He's like, all right, Natalie, we need to have a serious chat. And I was like, okay, here it comes. Like, how to succeed at Ohio State. It's coming to me from the vice president of the bank in Attica, Ohio. And he just leaned in and he said, you've been a big fish in a small pond for a very long time. Get ready for that to change. And so I entered Ohio State with that in mind. I thought, okay, I get to be camouflaged. I can hide for the first time in my life. No one needs to know who I am. And I think for the first 2 weeks, that was the most awesome experience ever, because it's the first time in my life that was able to happen. But then I just got really lonely. And I'm like, this isn't how I'm meant to be. I'm meant to be out and about and know people and do stuff. And so that's when I started to get involved on campus. That's when I decided, oh, no, bank vice president, we're going to flip this. You can be a small fish and make a big splash. And so that's kind of how I've gone about my career and how I took those small town lessons and used them to be successful, to get to know people, help connect all the dots to show people how we're connected and how the work we do matters and leads to a bigger outcome.
Well, I think you hit on a point there that if I'm reading between the lines that, and I've heard this before in my walks of life, that, money isn't everything. I mean, that's a cliche, but there's a whole lot more to a job or work or, whatever you do for a living, whether you're working for someone else or you're an entrepreneur. There's a whole lot more to it than money, whether that's satisfaction, happiness, freedom, just getting up and wanting to go to work in the morning.
Absolutely. I think most people will tell you that hands down. And I think growing up in a place where I didn't know any different, I mean, everyone in Republic, Ohio is primarily blue collar, a lot of farmers, lower to middle, lower class in terms of earnings. When I think about kind of where we sit here in our affluent suburb of Central Ohio,
sure.
And I knew no different. I knew no different, on a family who kind of lived off a starting salary of, what it looked like for me when I graduated from college. And I had a great life as a child. So I do think about that a lot, raising kids where we're raising children, because it doesn't have to be 4-star restaurants and, although those are really nice and resorts, it's sometimes, we got to go to the campground and cook on the barbecue.
For sure.
Yeah.
I think it's more memorable even, but yeah. Well, so now I know you've had an amazing, successful career thus far. I've kind of known you as you've kind of gone through some of this, but can you tell me, have there been any career defining moments throughout this process that maybe could help other people think about their own professional trajectory?
Absolutely. There was a defining moment. So just to give your audience a little bit of detail on kind of when we started to know each other and where we are now, we met, I think, in 2008 or around there, 2006, 7, 8, when I was still in business school. So I was working on my MBA. So you saw me as I got my first big job at Nationwide Insurance, which I held for 12 years. And you saw me kind of rise up through those entry level post MBA job into my people leader roles and into some more significant leadership opportunities there. And it was about midway through that time at Nationwide. So I think I was at year 5 or 6. I had my best review ever. I got my biggest raise ever. This goes back to your previous point, right? I'm looking at this, number that I'm like, holy moly, I'm so proud of myself, but I'm also like astounded that this is possible. But I'm also just not happy. I'm feeling what I call in my coaching practice, the feeling of meh. It's this feeling of, I just don't feel like I'm fully present and I'm fully there. And I happened to run into somebody at an offsite at work who was a coach. And for some reason, she had this aura about her that made me feel like I could tell her everything. And I told her how I was feeling. And she said to me, well, I'm a coach. Do you want to talk? And I thought, oh my gosh, seems to be kismet. So we talked and I ended up hiring her to be my coach for 6 months. And during that engagement, what I saw happen, and I think this is what a lot of your listeners might relate to, is you go from this feeling of meh, like, ugh, who am I? What's my role here? What's my purpose? And she helped me really understand what things lit me up, what things were super important to make sure I was doing on a regular basis, whether that be at my job or outside of work. Because that's also another thing people think about is like work needs to deliver all your happiness. And as soon as we can disconnect ourselves from that idea and realize that it does not need to connect us to the happiness, we're one step further. So from that engagement, I started small town leadership because she asked me, what do you love to do? And I said, I love to speak and I love to write. She said, okay, go do more of that. But I thought, well, what is it that I speak and write about? And it goes back to the beginning of our conversation. When I would be invited to speak at Ohio State, or when a local community group would want someone to come speak about things, I was always speaking about networking, professional development, and it was always connected to growing up in Republic, Ohio. It was always connected to the cornerstone pieces of being from a small town. And so I called this thing I was building small town leadership. And so now you're seeing me here 4 years later doing that work full time, as a coach, as a speaker, as a writer, putting those messages out into the world. So it was that moment of meh that led me to, on this 5-year journey, because it's a long path to get to that point, to be in a place where I'm excited to see what comes next.
I like meh better, but I've always called it what's next, or what now, is, kind of the feeling. It's okay, well, that's great, but what now,
Yeah, and I think some people are so in the meh, they're not even asking themselves what's next. They're kind of like, why bother?
Yeah. That's not good. Well,
no,
I guess
it's not good.
That's a good segue, I guess, because one of the things you and I were talking about before we jumped on the call here today was the concept of starting before you quit, which we've decided is going to be the title of this podcast. And that might not seem clear on the front end, but I think that when you got your MBA, like you mentioned, you were, really, really, really successful. I've known you and Rob for a while now, and I know for a fact you're very good at what you did in the corporate world. You were in high demand. You were successful, still successful, obviously, but during the middle of a pandemic, what propelled you to start doing this before you quit, first and foremost, but what gave you that courage, or what made you decide to take a leap ultimately after 4 years in the middle of a pandemic?
Yeah, I love this question. So this idea of quitting is so profound in, I think, everybody's idea from a work perspective, because I think everyone gets this idea of like, I quit, and you throw down your apron or throw your computer, do the whole office space, let's go beat the printer in the middle of an open field. And let's face it, like, that is not normally how people quit. So I started this business in 2016, and I did not know what the end game was. I still don't know what the end game is. And people ask me right away, like, oh, does this mean you're going to quit your job? Are you planning to do this full time? How are you monetizing this? Like, all these things. And I was like, I really don't know. I just needed a place to go and put my stuff out in the world. Let's start there. Could be happy for me for like pushing, publish on a website. Right. Yeah. So fast forward, and a year in, I decided to pursue a coaching certification. So I was understanding the business development of building a private coaching practice. I was starting to get some paid speaking engagements. And I was like, okay, all right, this is like a solid side hustle. And I think that's where you entered the picture, Adam, because I came to you and it was just you. Like, usually, it's you, me, and Rob meet, and we talk about the big life and let's talk about your retirement. But it was just like, no, I need to sit down with you and just say, what is this going to look like? If we want to be safe and secure and smart about me quitting this corporate job that I'm very good at, I'm in high demand for, I earn great money doing, I'm in no sign of like losing my job here. Like, what does it need to look like from a financial standpoint? So not only was it building a platform with which to bring my work to the world, but it was also feeling really good about, okay, if this totally tanks, or if things really go sideways and it doesn't go how I expected, we're still fine from a financial cushion standpoint. So you were really crucial in helping me identify that number, right? Sure. Like, as arbitrary as it might seem now, like I walked forward every day having a number. And so for the last 2 years, I have been building that business, evening hours, early mornings, lunch hours, days off, to coach clients, to do speaking gigs, to build full day programs to take to other organizations. And finally, at the end of 2019, I determined that I could not do both anymore.
Yep.
So this 3-year path made me realize that I, for the sake of my family, my sanity, and my work on both sides, I have to pick, I have to choose, and I have to draw a line in the sand. And so at the end of 2019, I set a date, and I set the date. It was supposed to be April 4th, 2020 was supposed to be my freedom day, the day that I turned 40 in January, and I'd been using this mantra, free by 40.
Nice.
And
I love it.
So I had everything. I mean, you know me well enough, Adam. I had a spreadsheet with the dates, and it was calculated, and I knew how many hours were left and all this. And then, COVID hit. And so I'm the day that I was planning to resign my position, the actual day was the day that Governor DeWine started shutting the state of Ohio down. And Rob looked at me that morning and he said, "It's now the right time to do this."
Sure.
And after like getting over being mad at him, because I thought it was a question of like, can I do this? It was more like, I know you can do this, but like today on March 12th is this day to do this. Right. And I was like, oh, okay. So I ended up hanging out a little bit past my date, but as the spring and summer wore on, I kept with my plan. Things kept growing. People kept wanting me to do stuff, and one thing led to another. And I was able to secure enough work for myself that I said, now's the time. So that's what I mean to start before you quit. Like, it's starting the thing that you think is your dream before you actually quit the secure day job. I think so many people get this vision of people who are off, running their own business, doing the 4-hour work week. And I think that's all a complete falsehood. Like, we have all been burning the midnight oil, or in my case, waking up at 5 o'clock in the morning for years so that we can do exactly what I'm doing right now, is sit in the bright light of the day and do whatever the heck I want on a given day, because it's my business as a self-employed person to do what I'm doing and bring value to the world.
For sure. You said a couple things earlier that I want to touch on, and I wasn't planning on today, but it's kind of rings true with me. And that is that, first of all, you mentioned earlier about how people have asked you several times, what's the end game, or, what are you doing with, what are your plans with this? And, what are your goals? And something, not to share in my own personal story, but I always kind of felt like, going back to your meh feeling, I always kind of felt like, I was always really goal oriented, and I had all these plans. And then you'd set these goals and you'd say, well, I want to hit these milestones or whatever. And then you'd hit them. And I'd always set my goals way, way, way too high. And I always did that because I worried that if I set them too low, that I would inadvertently and accidentally become lazy. You know what I mean? And so I always set my goals euphorically high. And then when people would ask, well, what's your plan? And then I'd hit these goals. I'd always say, well, now what? What's next? Or, man, it's not nearly as exciting as I hoped it would be when you hit the goal. And then when people start asking what the end game was, I always kind of felt this feeling of almost like feeling lost, but just kind of I don't want to say on a treadmill, because I was always moving in a direction, in the right direction. But one day, and this is the craziest story, and I don't tell too many people this story, but it's just
now you're telling everybody. So
I know. Now I'm telling everybody. I'm sitting down, and my kids, obviously, Karsten and Camden. Camden was 3 months old. Karsten was 3 years old. And I'm sitting down on the recliner before Donna woke up, and I'm staring at the TV watching ESPN Game Day. And Coach Mac Brown, who was coaching the Longhorns at the time, Texas Longhorns, was just being peppered by this reporter because he just wasn't doing well. He wasn't winning games. He was sucking wind, and his job was on the line. So what happened in this interview, and this was this aha moment for me anyway, was in this interview, he says the reporter basically gets frustrated and loses his temper because he can't get a rise out of him because he just keeps smiling. So he says, Coach Brown, can you explain to me, why it is that, you're probably not going to make a bowl game this year. You haven't won a championship or even contended for a championship in a couple of years. You haven't had a Heisman Trophy winner since however many years ago. Why are you smiling? And he said, and I'll paraphrase because I don't remember exactly what he said, but he said something to the effect of, I've learned in my life that you set these big goals and you have these big plans, and then you build these things up in your mind, whether that's buying a new car or, getting the best career that you've always wanted, or getting your MBA, and then you get it and it's over so quickly. And he says, I've realized to embrace the struggle. And I've learned that the part that I love the most is growing and building and, overcoming obstacles and just kind of enjoying that ride. And I hate to turn it into the cliche that, it's a journey down a destination, but for me, I don't know if anything like that happened to you, but for me, that did it. It was like, okay, stop worrying about the goals and stop worrying about where you're going or how you're going to get there. I'm sorry. Stop worrying about getting there, but more just worry about having fun. And even if, like, during the coronavirus, here we are, whether you're a business owner, you work for someone else, you're looking for a job because you've been laid off, understand that this is the struggle. And if you work your hardest now to get, all the things you want and to strive for happiness, that I think you'll find it by accident.
I think there aren't any coincidences. I think that's how I would line this up. And I totally agree with it. It is about the destination. It's not the journey. And I was even reflecting on the week I just had. So, as an entrepreneur, there's ups and downs, and you have weeks that you're like, oh my gosh, I can't do any more. And other weeks you're like, what is going on? And the two moments that I reflected on this week of just being proud of myself for were, one, I had a great conversation with one of my fellow coaches. We started coaching school together, and we just were each other's accountability partner. And it was a beautiful day. So for an hour, we were on the phone and I took a walk outside.
Nice.
So I was like, this is wonderful and gorgeous. And I'm having a great connection with somebody. I'm getting a little bit of exercise and fresh air. Amazing. And then honest to God, Adam, the other thing where I was most proud of was that at 3 p.m. before my kids were off the school bus, because blessedly they are in school right now. I did the dishes in the middle of the day. And that may sound crazy, but like, I just wouldn't have contemplated that from a 9 to 5 perspective before. I just would have been like, no, I need to be docked in. I need to be logged on. And I'm like, no, my kitchen is driving me crazy. I can plug in this podcast and get down with some Brene Brown right now and wash some dishes. And
get down with some Brene Brown.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah. So I totally I think we have to remember those moments to say, it was the day that I did dishes in the middle of the day, and it made my day so much better because it wasn't a crazy mess in my house for the rest of the time. I feel like those are those moments I'm trying to savor right now. And trust me, I celebrate big when I have a good win too.
Sure.
I mean, and that's the nice thing about working in the same place as my husband is, the big win happens and it's like, I can go celebrate really quick. It's like, oh my gosh, you're never going to believe what just happened. And so there've been a lot of those moments over the last several months too.
It's the little things, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So my wife, Dawn, and I were just talking last night, literally, about how you have a book coming out. And your very first published book, right?
Yes.
And I've seen some release notes pop up on LinkedIn. I get your newsletter, of course, and I've seen some things, but give me the dirty details, tell me more about it. What's it about? Why should I pick up a copy? Or I guess you don't pick up copies anymore. Now you have them ordered on Amazon and they come to your doorstep. But how can I help your readers? Tell us more about the book.
Yes. Oh my gosh. This is probably what I'm most excited about right now. I think as I get closer to launch date on November 19th is launch day. I'm super excited. So the book is called Let Her Out, Reclaim Who You've Always Been. And like most things in my life, the book didn't just happen. It wasn't on the master plan. I always knew I would write a book, but I didn't know what the book would be. As a matter of fact, 2 years ago, I tried to start a book and it just didn't happen. I'm like, because that wasn't meant to be the book. So this book happened to me. So let me give you a little bit of background and then what it's about and why everybody should go get a copy on November 19th. I have been submitting for TED Talks for the last 5 years. So, usually
nice.
the Columbus TED Talks open it up and I'm like, I'll think of something to go with that theme and submit. So I'm a, frequent submitter and frequently rejected TEDx speaker as well. So last year I got really excited because there was a TEDx women's event coming to Columbus. And I had recently stumbled upon all of the diaries I've kept since I was 8 years old. And when I say 8, from 8 until 25, there were no more than 3 days would pass usually in that time that I didn't write in the journal. So it's a big box of things. So I found those and I was thinking about my coaching practice. I was thinking about the fact that I knew I was embarking in secret on my full-time self-employment in 2020. And I thought, this is the story that's called, this talk is called Let Her Out, Reclaim Who You've Always Been. Because what happened when I read the diaries is I'm like, that's who I want to be more of.
Interesting.
I want to be that young girl who wanted to be the president of the United States, who would unabashedly get on a stage with a microphone and do almost anything, who would stand up for my beliefs, who would cry if I needed to cry, stomp my feet if I needed to stomp my feet. And so I wrote this pitch for a TED Talk and I didn't make it. I was very close, but did not make it. And I was like, there's still something here. So I submitted it for several keynotes in 2020. They all got accepted and then they all got canceled because of COVID.
Right, of course.
And so as I'm thinking about what to do with this, I'm like, I can even just shut this down, forget that I had the idea. No one will know otherwise. But something was burning in me with this. I'm like, no, I'm actually going to do this. So I made up my own keynote time on a Wednesday night and I invited people to join me on Zoom. And I stood in this very office and delivered my Let Her Out keynote, or what would have been that TEDx talk. And to feel what I felt over the airwaves that night was just so powerful. So the next day in April, I hired a book coach. And within an hour, we had the outline written. And by the end of May, this is this year. Yeah, this is what inspired action looks like.
You just finished a book in a matter of months.
So, here's what I tell people, because they say, how long have you been writing the book? I'm like, well, technically 32 years.
Okay. Yeah, sure.
But
Yeah.
but really, in earnest, I started the book in April. I had a done manuscript at the end of May, so it was about a 6-week
Wow.
process. But here's the deal: like, I had written a ton over the last 4 years, so it's a lot of blog content that's meshed into new stories. But it's truly where my life story meets life coaching. And what I think why I'm excited about this is, and I'm an avid reader. Like, I read all the stuff that comes out. I listen to the stuff that comes out, and I love it, right? Huge Brene Brown fan, huge Glennon Doyle fan, huge Rachel Hollis fan. Like, those are the women that speak to me. But when I think about their life stories, they've all had these huge peaks and valleys, addiction and struggle and suicide and just these
Right.
really big, heavy things. And then on the flip side, like, Brené's TED Talk like reached 5 million viewers and like set her into the stratosphere. And
Right.
so when I think about my story, I'm like, there's no tragedy. There's no triumph. Yeah, there might be little hills and dips and valleys, but none of this, crazy stuff that we see from the best-selling authors. And I'm thinking that's the story that people need to hear.
Right.
Because
Especially now.
that's the story that the suburban mom like me wants to hear, because she's maybe not overcoming one of these huge big things, but just like wondering, how do I get through the day being more of myself? So this book is
That's
for
great.
anybody who just wants to be more of herself. It helps you remember who you were, reconnect to who you were, and then remove all the barriers. That's what happens in life. And that's what I work with all my coaching clients on, is let's figure out what barriers we've erected, either in our own mind, which is usually 85% of the time, or those that society
Right.
has told us. Society has told us to be quiet. Society has told us to be nice. Society has told us to be all these things in this nice little box. And we're like, screw it. I don't want to do that anymore. So then we get to let her out. So that's, in a nutshell, the Cliff Notes
That's
version
great.
of the book. And I can't wait to see what happens. The early readers who have read it have had great things to say. I put a group of women through a coaching program using the content this spring or summer and fall, and it was amazing. And we cried and we laughed, and we're going to do it again in 2021.
Nice. That's great. I'm excited. Excited to grab one.
Yeah, and I
Uh,
think too, even for you, Adam, I've had a lot
yeah.
of men say, well, it's let her out. Like, how do I relate to this? So I have 3 pages right up at the front is like, what do I do if I'm not a her? And so it's very clear, like, you have a couple options. Just every time you read her, switch to him, no biggie.
Yeah.
Or you read it with the eye toward Donna
Sure.
and sisters and women and the others in your life, who you almost read it as their ally, to say, how much of this has happened to you? How much of this do you relate to? And I think it's going to be a great dialogue starter between couples, between mothers and daughters, between friend groups. So I say I didn't write a book. I'm starting a movement, and I'm really
Nice.
excited just to be here to start that with you.
Yeah. I'll think I'll do both. I'll do the, changing the gender name, and I'll also think of it in terms of all the women in my life. The last question I had for you, it's a funny question because we both adore spreadsheets. So,
Mm.
but I work with numbers all day. I stare at stock charts all day. I look at financial plans and estate plans, and that's what I do. And I often have people come into my office and say, after the first meeting, let's just say when they first, meet us the first time for a discovery meeting, we'll say, do you have any questions? And they'll always say, well, I really don't know what to ask at this point. So now I'm flipping the roles here. So with regard to coaching, speaking, leadership, the things that you do, I don't even know what to ask. So what would you say to that in terms of what you're doing for the people that you work with?
I think that's a really good question, and a nice way for us to round out the discussion today. So I've given a lot of glimpses, both from my own personal experience and even from some of the ways I work with my clients in the last, 30 minutes we've been talking. But I think a lot of people don't really understand what coaching is. So let me just describe what coaching is, and then I could describe more broadly how my full practice kind of rounds that out. So coaching is really helping people look forward. It is not therapy. It is not healing the wounds from the past. So even when I think about the book I wrote, it is a life coaching book. It allows you to reflect back, but not to like sit in that, not to like go back to the places that harmed you or were tragic for you, but really like what we want to bring you back to is your essence, your true who you are. And so good coaching allows you to pull that out of yourself and drive that into your future, and to help set goals and outcomes and build plan, co-create a plan together, and hold the client accountable to making that plan happen. So one of the things I work with all my clients, and I tend to work with a lot of executive level women who are seeking to get to the top spot. They want to be the CEO. They want to be the top owner in the company. And I work with a lot of middle level managers who are trying to be more effective in their role. And I like both equally because I love the idea of women getting to the top spot. And I also love the idea of middle level managers making work a much better place for anybody who works for them. But we always start out with some very clear questions around what is the outcome you are seeking? And a lot of times it's soft stuff, Adam. It's not to earn this much money or to lose this much weight. It's really, I want to feel better. I want to be more confident. I want to be less overwhelmed. And so we unpack that. What does that actually look like and mean? And if you get there, what does that look like? And so really it's a 3, 6, 9, 12-month exercise in always working to get there, to get to the longer term goal in the day to day. So just like I said, I enjoyed the day I did the dishes. For my clients, I want them to be able to look back at their week and say, here are the moments when I knew I was working toward those bigger goals because I could feel it right then. You don't want to have to wait to get to the goal to feel it. You want to feel it all the way. So I really love working with my clients to help them start before they quit. And it doesn't mean they're quitting their job. I actually have helped a lot of companies retain their employees by coaching them and helping them understand the wonderful things that their company does allow them to do, and to reignite their passions for the things that they could do outside of work. Like for those who aren't watching this, you've got a keyboard behind you. Like I would engage in a coaching dialogue with Adam around, I know you're busy, crazy with kids and stuff, but what would 10 minutes a day to turn and do something with that keyboard do for your mental well-being and for your overall level of happiness?
Yeah, if I started touching that keyboard, I'd probably the day would go away.
Right.
I wouldn't even notice. It'd be gone.
Yeah, exactly. So it's getting people in that mindset. And so coaching is where I spend a lot of the time in my business, and I love doing it. What I love doing even more is speaking. And right now, a lot of the real stages are closed. So I've been doing a lot of virtual speaking, which has been fun, but it's a lot different talking to the black dot on the top of your screen than to real live people. So I very much look forward to the day when we can all kind of be out in the open again, to take the stage, to spread these messages to women's groups, company organizations, community groups that can benefit from this message of either let her out, or, how do we think about creating these small town ideals in our big organizations to help everybody feel like their work matters?
Hopefully sooner than later. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, this has been great. So it's Let Her Out, November 19th, the book comes out. I think we'll end today's show on that. And you can check out Natalie's website at smalltownleadership.com. And I'll also have contact information. If you're watching this on YouTube, I'll have contact information in the notes section below as well, but you can feel free to reach out to her personally at her website. Also, please feel free to share this episode with friends and family. And if you'd like to discuss your personal situation further when it comes to some of the things Natalie talked about on the financial planning side, remember, you never have to ask a question in terms of reaching out to me personally. Of course, if you'd like to set up an introduction call or Zoom meeting, just head over to our website at libertaswealth.com and you can jot something down on our calendar. And as I always say, there are thousands and thousands of podcasts out there, and you gave ours a listen today. So thank you so much for tuning in. Again, be sure to subscribe both on iTunes and YouTube. And remember, you can sign up at libertaswealth.com to get these updates, as well as other screencast videos and articles that we write delivered directly to your email inbox. And a lot of them, as you can tell, have nothing to do with money at all. We try to do a lot of different things here. So feel free to follow us on Facebook. I'm also on Twitter at Adam Koós, if you want to nerd out with me in the stock chart realm. And I'm also on Instagram at Financial Surgeon. So thank you once again for watching and listening today, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to the Cash Podcast with your financial surgeon, Adam Koós. To see any charts or images that were mentioned in this show, or to check out additional articles, videos, and other educational resources, head over to libertaswealth.com.